Hi, this is Miss Moon's class, and Miss Moon is gonna do the paper with you.
Yes, I am. So we're moving on to Packet B. So this is the first page, and let's take a look at question 1. Raul is making a scale model of an airplane that has a wingspan of 44 feet. If Raul's scale model is 1/16 of the size of the actual plane, what is the wingspan of his model? So here's what they're asking you. They're saying that the real plane would be 40 feet across the wings of the airplane, and his scale is going to be 1/16 of the actual 1/16 of the actual airplane. So look at how I write this. It's going to be 1/16 of the airplane. So when you see the word of, we learned that of means times. It means to multiply. So 1/16 times, and then the airplane, we have a number for that. They told us the actual wingspan is 44 feet. So it's 1/16 times 44. And when we multiply fractions, you have to put the 44 over 1. Before I multiply, I'm noticing that 16 and 44 have a common factor that I could use to simplify ahead of time. So I'm going to divide both of them by 4. 44 divided by 4 is 11. 16 divided by 4 is 4. So now when we multiply, it's a lot easier. 1 times 11 is 11. 4 times 1 is 4. So we have 11/4. And if you look, that's not a choice, so we're going to need to find an equivalent fraction. You should notice that the numerator is bigger than the denominator, which means that you should divide and you'll end up with a mixed number. So it's going to be one of these two. So 11 divided by 4. Okay, so there's 3. And then you use a fraction to finish, so 3/4. So it's letter C. For number 2, 2/3 of the students in Hannah's homeroom plan to do volunteering this summer. Of those students, 3/5 plan to volunteer at the community center. What fraction of the students are going to volunteer at the community center? So they're telling you 2/3 of the students are volunteering, and 3/5 of them will be at the community center. So they're using that word of again. 2/3 of the students are volunteering, and 3/5 of those volunteers will be working at the community center. So again, of, it just means to multiply. So take 3/5, multiply by 2/3, and that will tell you which students are going to volunteer at the community center. 3 times 2 is 6. 5 times 3 is 15. And when you look, that's not a choice. So look back at the fraction and find an equivalent one. We can simplify this. Both of these numbers are divisible by 3. And so you get 2/5. So it's choice H. For number 3, this question has a lot of steps to it. It's not that difficult, but you do have to go through 3 different steps to solve this question. So which point on the number line is closest to the product of the numbers graphed at points R and T? So they're using the word product, which should make you think multiplication. And they're asking you about the points R and T. So the first thing you need to do is find them. So here's R, here's T. And it says the product of the numbers at points R and T. Well, product means you have to multiply, but right now there are no numbers. So the first thing you have to do is you have to figure out what are these points, what numbers are they? So if you look, we go from 0 to 1, and you have to figure out how much each little line in between there is worth, or how much each of those spaces are worth. So we have to count. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So between 0 and 1, that number is split into 10 pieces. So they've taken this one number and they've divided it into tenths. So this first line is 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and then 10/10 would be 1. So they asked you the product of R and T. So we now know R and we know T. So product means multiply. So we'll take 7/10 for R, multiply by 9/10 for T. 9 times 7 is 63. And then you can go through and multiply all these zeros, but it's not necessary. I'll put this 0 here. So 9 times 7 is 63. And 9 times 0 is 0, plus 6 is 6. To place the decimal, count the number of places from the right. So 1, 2, 1, 2. And so the product of R and T is 63 hundredths. Okay, so the first step was to figure out what this number line was counting by, what each of those spaces represented, which was tenths. The second step was to multiply the values for R and T, so we did that. And now the third step says, which point is closest to the product? So here's the product. Which point is closest to 63 hundredths? And now this number line doesn't go to hundredths, so the best thing to do is to look at this and say, okay, well, 63 hundredths is really just closest to 6/10. So look back at the number line and check which point is at 6/10. And the answer is Q. So point Q is closest to the product of R and T. For number 4, which quadrant does point A lie on the coordinate plane? You really just need to remember where the quadrants are. And so as a review, you start right here where you have all positive numbers. That's quadrant 1. Remember, that's Roman numeral 1. And then you work counterclockwise, 2, 3, and 4. So point A is in quadrant 2. For number 5, which of the following integers has the greatest absolute value? So remember, absolute value is when you use these straight lines, these bars, and absolute value tells you distance from 0. So let's find the absolute value of each of these. Well, the absolute value of 0 is just 0. The absolute value of 7 is 7. It's 7 units from 0. The absolute value of -10 is 10. It means it's 10 units from 0. The absolute value of 1 is 1. So which one has the greatest value? Well, the greatest number is 10, so it's letter H. The Panthers football team lost 4 yards on each of their first 2 plays of the game. Which of the following integers represents the progress of the team after the first 2 plays? So for each of the plays, the first 2, they lost 4 yards. So remember, when we see lost 4 yards, we represent that with a negative. So on the first play, they lost 4 yards. On the second play, they lost another 4 yards. So how much progress have they made after 2 plays? Well, they've gone backwards. They've lost a total of 8 yards. And so it's A, -8.